plug our next session. You know, you guys have been really patient and wonderful participants in this first time workshop for us. For our last session, we did want to bring some pastelitos, so we'll have some stuff for the first time ever here for you. So hopefully that will entice you guys to continue your participation. It really has been wonderful. So just wanted to say that before we start. All right, it's 12 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back from the Thanksgiving break. So happy that you guys can join us. Hopefully everyone had a happy Thanksgiving, happy time with family and friends. Now, this particular session does involve assessments, right? Different forms of assessments, different types of assessments that you can incorporate in your online course. But I would be remiss if I didn't include the traditional forms, right? The question sets that are available within Blackboard for you to use. And I did want to highlight, before we get into some of the alternative forms of evaluation you can incorporate, I did want to talk about what's already embedded within Blackboard that you might be interested in utilizing, or maybe you just need reminding that it's there to actually incorporate it. Now, we already have a lot of tests that we support, whether you're in business, English, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of testing that goes on. But usually the questions that are on tests are just multiple choice, right? You know, multiple choice may be a true and false. Well, Blackboard has other options, other alternatives for you to create question sets. And we'll get more into this with other topics, but it's really important differentiation, right? There's a lot of things coming out in research in the learning sciences that are proving that when you provide different forms of questions, even if it's just within a traditional test, that the learning outcomes are better, right? You're exposing students to different thought processes depending on the topic that you're questioning them on. So definitely want to talk about hotspot. Now I know this might maybe only seem relevant to people in geography. There's a lot of different ways you can go about this. Maybe you have an image of multiple forms of statistics, and students have to pick which form, which formula, or which question set, you know, which one is the right one, or which one maybe can answer a scenario-based question. And then they get to just click on the hotspot, and you create, you know, you upload an image, and then you create however many hotspots you want on the image. Again, we'll help with that process if that's something you're interested in. And then students will be able to just click on what they think is the right formula, the right country, the right capital, what have you. There's a lot of different implications you can have for that. Now, I get told a lot that the reason that professors personally like assessments is, hey, I have 50 students in my class, or I have 100 undergraduates in my class. I don't have time to grade essays, to look through questions. I like the automatic grading feature of the multiple choice. But the multiple choice question type isn't the only one that's automatic. I did want to also talk about that the short answer format, so it's only going to be 2 or 3 lines for the students to write, has the ability for you to write the answer text, and the system will automatically see if the student got close enough to what you wrote as the answer text to get the question right. So you're still allowing students to write out a response. Granted, it's only a couple sentences, but write out a response, and the Blackboard system, if you dictate what the right answer is, will automatically look through that student's answer and see if they got close enough to mark it correct. So, you know, there's other, you know, formats that allow for that automation to happen. You don't have to just lean on multiple choice questions. We were looking at this earlier. Again, interesting, different form, but it's called Quiz Bowl. So students have to answer in Jeopardy form, like what is, who is, where is, you know, blah-de-blah. You know, if you watch Jeopardy, I think that's the biggest detail for this particular type. But it is something different, right? It does allow that differentiation that can really improve the learning outcomes for the topic that you're trying to teach these students. So really just wanted to, again, talk about exploring these different question sets. We'd be happy to assist, help, if you'd like to incorporate this in an already existing final exam or midterm exam. We'd be happy to go over the different options you have and again set it up for you. With that being said, we're going to talk about different forms of evaluation and maybe things that might be more impactful than just your traditional multiple choice or exam that we're all too familiar with. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ron to begin.
All right. Thank you, Luis. All right, guys. I was like Luis was saying. Hopefully, you guys all had a great Thanksgiving with family and friends. So, wanted to go over a couple things like he started to mention. I wanted to go over and not go over the traditional ways of assessment. I'm looking at going over and covering what's called a portfolio approach. And the portfolio approach basically is going to be providing multiple means for your students to be assessed. Examples of that could be, you have an assignment, and instead of just having the ability to respond your answers written, they can respond via text. They can obviously written. They could do a video and upload it. If they're not comfortable in front of the camera, they can record their voice and upload it. And it provides them multiple means to be able to prove, have they grasped the material? Have they proved what they were going to learn in your course? Usually I don't start off with a video, but this time I am, because it's a great way to take a look at how alternative assessments and a portfolio approach is being used right now.
Okay, testing. How do you feel when I say those words? Get that little knot in the pit of your stomach? Maybe a little tingle in your spine? Maybe there's a little happy light bulb going off over your head. Well, that's our first question. Let's take a test. And raise your hand to designate your answers. Let's see if this will move. There we go. What do you think? Are standardized tests A, fun to take? Anyone? B, an important tool for evaluating knowledge? A couple of people. C, a necessary evil? Now we got some hands. What about D, a distraction from real learning? Almost everyone. Well, I'll tell you a little secret. I actually love taking multiple choice standardized tests. I like psyching out the test maker and figuring out what they think is the right answer, and I love having a right answer, which happens to me very rarely in the rest of my life. So this is a very finely developed art for many of us. But in fact, this skill that we spend so much time on is practically useless. Dozens of studies have shown that the kinds of standardized tests we use predict almost nothing about your success later in life. And if you think about it, when have you ever gone to the office and gotten a piece of paper with a set of questions and predetermined answers that you could check off, turn in, and go home because your work is done? Has not happened to me. Or what about a young engineering grad who goes down the street for their first tech job, gets their first engineering problem and says, what are my 5 choices? That would be the first and last day on the job for that young person. And in fact, if you did go down the street to Google, you would in fact not be given a test or asked for your test scores. They used to take that information and transcripts and use that to figure out who to hire, but they discovered when they studied it that there was no correlation between those scores and how people performed on the job. And so today, if you want to apply for a job there, they would be trying to find out about your learning ability. Your ability to get new information, figure out how to apply it to a complex problem, work with other people and other ideas to frame a puzzle or a solution, test it, learn from that, and develop a product or a solution. And in fact, that set of skills are in greater demand in the economy as a whole. We've seen a sharp increase in the demand for higher order thinking skills and complex communication and problem solving, and a sharp decrease in the demand for skills that are routine, like the sort that people needed on the assembly line and in the factory, because those jobs are being outsourced and digitized. And this problem is getting even more pronounced as knowledge is growing at a very rapid pace. Now, as a Stanford professor, I don't usually like to quote people from Cal Berkeley. I'm sure there's somebody from Cal in the house. Yeah, always is. But there are these two professors at Cal who have been doing fascinating research. They've been studying the growth of knowledge in the world. And they found that between 1999 and 2003, there was more new knowledge created in the world than in the entire history of the world preceding. Think about that. And think about what that means for education. It means we can't take all the facts we want kids to know and divide them up into the 12 years of schooling and get them to memorize those facts and spit them back. It means our young people are going into a world where they will use knowledge that hasn't been discovered yet and technologies that have not been invented yet to solve complex problems that we have not managed to solve. Global climate change, the availability of water and food to feed the earth, deep conflicts that need to be resolved, without which we may have no planet in a couple of decades. They need a lot more than the ability to pick one answer out of 5.
We're gonna go ahead and stop it right there. It's about 15 minutes long. When we send out the slides, you guys will be able to see the rest of the video yourself on your when we send you the link. But the great point is that I like about this video is towards the end of the first 4 minutes that I showed you is new knowledge that's being created. You know, students are coming up with ways that they are better at showing and displaying what they've learned, how they've grasped the material, do they understand it, versus using a traditional test. As she was saying, we can't just divide, 12 years of K through 12 and just expect them to learn, is it an A, B, C, or D? So these are great examples of why the portfolio approach is a good way for you to assess your students and they can show their ability of what they've learned and grasped. And we can sit down with you and evaluate your current courses that you're teaching online, and we can see how we could add additional ways that students could pretty much submit and show what they've learned in the course itself. And that's something we could do. If you guys are interested in, we'll go over it and we can look at your course in detail if you want to set up a time. I just wanted to go over this quick slide that I had put up. And it's the difference between portfolio assessment and a standard classroom test. And as it says, in a traditional exam, the student's ability to answer the questions correctly is the only factor that can be used for them to pass him or her. Versus in portfolios, it allows for direct input from the students. Portfolios, obviously, they require a self-evaluation component, such as a reflective essay that lets students describe their overall experience in the class and the portfolio creation process. It also allows students to practice critical thinking, let them decide how well the portfolio measures up to course goals and standards. And having these multiple forms of presenting what you've learned in the class, it gives those students that ability to be creative. Can I use a video? Can I use sound? Can I use images? I can use a Prezi presentation. And it allows them to be creative and use that form to show what they've learned in the course itself. A couple of characteristics that I like to point out about the portfolio assessment processes. A portfolio is a form of assessment that students do together with their teachers. So this is something that you will see their growth as they start off in Module 1 and progress through the course. And by the time they get to Module 8, you'll see their growth over time of how they're expressing themselves, what tool they become most comfortable with, and showing what they've learned and how they've learned if they've mastered the skills in that particular course. A portfolio is not just a collection of student work, but it's a selection of it. They get to display their best work, and they put it forward so you can see that as their display of what they've learned. It provides samples of the students' work, with growth over time, like I was saying. The criteria for selecting and assessing the portfolio contents must be clear to the teacher and the students at the beginning of the process. So this is something that can be brought up in the syllabus right off the bat. So as the course, before the course even begins, they're able to see this, and they're gonna see that they have multiple means of submitting and displaying what they've learned over time. And finally, the entire portfolio can demonstrate the learning growth and their competencies. So I like to say that students are used to this traditional way, but the new students that are coming in now to courses are looking for multiple ways of displaying how they grasp and understand the material that's being presented to them. And in the digital age right now that we're using, all these students come in, and most of them are probably comfortable with video, but maybe they're not in front of the camera. So having that voice upload, as a sound file, could, you know, display what they've learned. Maybe they got a great voice, maybe they're more comfortable that way. So like I was saying earlier, if you guys want to sit down and look at your courses and, you know, maybe provide a portfolio approach, it's not going to be a complete revamp, but it's really nice to see that there's going to be additional forms that students could use to submit what they've learned, and you'll be able to see their growth over time. So it's a great process that you could use and incorporate into your courses. I'm going to pass it back to Luis. He's going to go into some productive failure. There's some really good stuff, and we'll have questions for you as well. And at any time, if you have questions, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Here you go.
Thank you. So I did want to talk about something that I think we're all familiar with, which is failure. We've all failed at times throughout our lives in different capacities, and I hope that we can all in unison say that those failures have really contributed to our growth as humans, as people. And so we know that, right? We know that, you know, overcoming failures really can build someone's character. Yet, we go into a classroom, and usually the students, our best students, are the ones who get it, right? Are the ones who ace your test, ace your projects, ask the questions, and they just seem successful. But what about those other students, right? What about those other students who are maybe shy, quiet, maybe not getting a subject or topic, and maybe it's difficult for them? Does that mean that they're bad at history? Does that mean that they're bad at math? Because they don't get it the first time around. And so this particular learning theory that has emerged from this gentleman called Manu Kapoor, he teaches at, I believe it's ETH Zurich. It's one of the universities in Zurich in Switzerland. And he developed this concept as a learning theory of productive failure. And he's done multiple studies on it. This one that I'm holding in my hand right now, it was in regards to a math course. It was, I believe, a high school math course in Europe, in Switzerland. Or actually, my apologies, in India. The students came from India. So he divided the students into two groups. One was what he called direct instruction, which I'm guilty of thinking this way as well. Involves scaffolding, involves a heavy instructor interaction, multiple assignments, a lot of projects, some of the stuff we were talking about just earlier. And then he had another group. The other group had minimal interaction with the professor. They were immediately confronted with math problems, and they were forced to work together in order to solve those math problems. I will briefly read the abstract for you because I think it really, or part of the abstract, really summarizes what the two groups. So PF, which is Productive Failure Group, it is a group where students collaboratively solved complex problems on average speed without any instructional support or scaffolds up until a teacher-led consolidation. So there was a moment to consolidate, a group together back with the professor and see their findings. As opposed to the second group, direct instruction, in which the teacher provided strong instructional support, scaffolding, and feedback, a lot of the things we promote. Findings suggested that although the productive failure students generated a diversity of linked representations and methods for solving the complex problems, essentially different ways of solving the same problem, they were ultimately unsuccessful in their problem-solving efforts. They didn't solve it correctly. Yet, despite seemingly failing in their problem-solving efforts, productive failure students significantly outperformed direct instruction students on the well-structured and complex problems on the post-test. They also demonstrated greater representation flexibility in solving average speed problems involving graphical representation. The second and third study, so he conducted more studies after, conducted in schools with students of significantly lower mathematical abilities, largely replicated the findings of the first study. And now it's funny because you want to think of it as groundbreaking, or at least me personally wants to think of this study as groundbreaking. Wow, how could a group of students who were just pretty much told to solve problems on their own and failed at it, how could they do better than the students who have the instructor, have the scaffolds, and have the constant feedback? But I think this concept, right, and I think what we're seeing with learning sciences is that what's groundbreaking or what's innovative is essentially just what's basic, right? When we're learning to ride a bike, you got to get on the bike. I can teach you until I'm red in the face on how to ride that bike, but you gotta fail, right? You gotta fall. And sometimes it's that fear that can motivate someone to finally ride that bike and go the distance. And I think it's that same concept here, is that you have to give opportunities for students to fail. And that replicates the outside world, right? These students will fail in different regards throughout their life, but it's their resolve, their ability to problem solve, their ability to think differently on problems that will ultimately make them successful, right? When we talk about liberal arts education and that critical thinking that's so desired in Silicon Valley, a lot of those skills can be developed through productive failure, through allowing your students in a safe space, right? I'm not saying let them fail in everything or let them teach themselves. I mean, I don't think this goes that far. But having assignments where they do have the ability to think about problem solving in different ways, where they don't have a guide, where they don't even have instructions, and they're told to figure things out, that's kind of how we're approached in the real world, right? I think becoming a professor, you learn through your PhD program, you write that wonderful dissertation, and then you're given that professorship. It's not everyone has a mentor, right? Not everyone has someone giving you instructions on how to be a successful professor. It's a similar thing here. We have to allow our students to kind of learn along the way, right? And have a safe space to fail and not get things. I think that should be the norm, right? Is your students not getting something, as opposed to everyone understanding everything the first try. So interesting learning theory. He's done a lot of work on it. I think ultimately it's creating a good problem takes time. You can't just ask students anything. I'm not saying that he gave them calculus. He did specific scenario-based questions that had multiple ways of getting to the answer. So there was ambiguity there. And then, the way he organizes it and the way you assemble these problems really make a difference ultimately. And this study gets more into those specifics on how to design problems for this sort of concept, productive failure. But the rest of the world learns like this, right? I think why Japan outperforms us, many countries in Europe outperforms us, is because those students are confronted with problems. They're not handheld. They're given these issues, they're given these problems, and they're told to work together to solve them. So there's two components to remember to this that I want to hit home, and that's creating problems and questions that have multiple answers or multiple ways to get to the answer, as well as collaboration, allowing students to work together to solve that issue or that problem. And the results, I think, within this study kind of speak for themselves. I'll share the link to this article with the recording of this particular session so you can read at your leisure and maybe read some more on this particular gentleman. A lot of great stuff, so just wanted to bring this to your attention, and maybe that's where we go, right, with evaluations and assessments, is at least one assignment that they can fail, or they're supposed to fail, right, that they're supposed to kind of regroup and learn from. So,
did he break the class into groups, or was it the whole class together?
Great question. They were separated, so the students didn't have interaction with so the direct instruction students didn't have
I'm
any.
saying even within, of course, he had to have a control group, but within the two groups, were they huge groups, or did he split further into smaller groups, so that, because if you leave 20 people just solve it together, it might be too crazy.
That's a good question. I don't remember the specific number, but
Then don't worry,
when I was reading through it, it appeared that it was one whole class.
Okay,
So the whole class kind of problem solved together,
okay.
and they worked together to solve those issues. And funny enough, they didn't get it right? They failed, and yet on the post-test they did really well. So I do find that very interesting. So thank you. With that, I'm going to give it to Ariella, who's going to talk about gainful pedagogy.
Hi, I'm here to talk to you guys about the gamification of the assessment process. And the information that's going to be in the following slides is mainly based off of the University of Michigan's gainful pedagogy approach. So this approach is based off of self-determination theory, which states that in order to promote an environment where students feel intrinsically motivated, they need to feel like they are able to make meaningful choices within their environment, which is autonomy. They need to feel the ability to sort of the ability to overcome these challenges and complete the tasks, which is competence, and they need to feel like they are connected to those around them, which falls into belongingness right here. So intrinsic motivation is the sweet spot, which is in the middle of all these three different concepts. And how this can tie into the educational process is, you know, I'm sure you guys have experienced that you guys can't force your students to learn, you can't force them to engage in the courses. But instead of trying to force that sort of outcome, it focuses on sort of promoting this environment which makes them desire to learn, which makes them want to engage. And in order to go about that, one of the first things that the universities suggest is to have this sort of switch in perspective. So instead of having this traditional system where you start off with 100% and then the students complete different assignments that can sort of lower the amount that they get in the class, they suggest that you go into a point system where everyone starts off at around 0 points and they complete different assignments to sort of get up to the correct amount of points that they need to get an A, whatever grade they desire. So for example, if they want to get an A, you can say that the threshold to gain an A in a class would be 12,000 points. So they sort of just complete the assignments to get up to there. So one of the first things I want to talk to you guys about is choice, which is useful for promoting autonomy, because students need to feel like they have control over their learning environment. So in order to do this, they suggested that you have your sort of core points. So in this example, they said 12,000 points in A. The core points is the assignments that you absolutely want your students to complete, you think it's absolutely necessary for them to do. So in this example, they have, you know, reading, reactions, problem sets, and lab reports. That was that teacher's core education. But the rest of the points is sort of left up to the student's own choice. So they could decide, okay, I want to complete a blog, I want to do different projects and podcasts in order to complete these 5,000 points that I need in order to get an A. And one of the most gratifying elements of video games is that you get this sort of instantaneous feedback from the different actions that you complete. But one of the things that is kind of hard to do is to sort of give this instant feedback. So what they suggest is that you have these detailed rubrics that you create in the beginning of the semester. And this is a little bit more work to complete because you have to go through every single assignment and create all these descriptions. But at the end, it will make your grading process more fast because you already have this sort of preset conditions that your students need to complete in order to get different grades. And they'll also know what they need to do in order to get the desired grade that they want. So again, this is what Louise talked about earlier, but one of the most important aspects of video games is the freedom to fail. Because you get to experiment different things, you get to take risks and try different experiences and fail miserably, and then you get to go back and do the process again and again until eventually you get it right. So that kind of freedom allows students to feel that they can really go about different things in different manners and learn the different ways to reach one solution, which is essential, especially in today's world. So one of the concepts or examples that they have is that you can allow students to resubmit an assignment multiple times. And this is a little bit more work, but if you don't want to go through it in that way, you can have students resubmit an assignment if they don't reach a particular threshold. So say if students score below 70, then they can resubmit their assignment. And one of the other ways is to sort of structure multiple pathways of assessment so that failure in one area does not limit a student's course success. So if a student doesn't do so well in an essay, you can just say, hey, you can complete a podcast if you want to make up these points. So it allows them to sort of go about their assignments in different ways. And another thing is transparency. So for this method to work, students need to be aware of the amount of thresholds that they need to get a certain grade. So an A is 12,000 points, a B is 10,000, so on. And they need to be aware of the amount of assignments that they have and how many points that each one of those assignments will get them, so they can choose what they need to complete. And you also need to have all the rubrics and assignments ready to go from the start of the class, so they know what to choose. So another concept that the approach does mention is having the students be aware of where they are in the class. So for example, say that they're at a threshold where they've earned 9,000 points. They can see that the class average is 8,350, and the lowest score is 6,700, and the higher score is 10,000. So they'll know whether they're behind, or if they're excelling, or if they're just right on track. So this is sort of, it's an important concept to implement. Any questions?
And just briefly to add to that, it won't, in Blackboard, we can't replicate that same exact format that you saw of 9,000 points below average. But there are actually data analytics that students have access to that showcases similar. So it wouldn't be by points, but it'd show where that student ranks as opposed to the other students as well. So that sort of information is available for students already built into Blackboard, where they can see where they stand in the totality of their fellow classmates. With that said, I do also want to open it up for discussion. I want to particularly talk about what the professor from Stanford had mentioned in her speech about knowledge, right? She said that from those researchers from Berkeley realized that from 1999 to 2003, which isn't a very wide time frame, that there was more knowledge created, right, in that short amount of time than had been created all of human history previously, which I don't know how they quantify that. I don't know the specifics. I don't know what counts as knowledge. But how do you think that sort of information implicates your teaching, and what do you think that means for us as higher education professionals? Does it change anything? Is it interesting? Do you think she's wrong?
I think for me it means that new things are coming out all the time, and so we have to be on the forefront of chasing up some of this new knowledge.
Yeah.
How many new articles have been written on a particular topic in a particular year?
Absolutely.
So rather than assigning a set of books, for example, a set of articles, we have to keep changing them. We have to keep doing different things because these new things are coming up. And if we stick to what we have all the time, then we are shortchanging our students in terms of not nudging them in areas of new knowledge. That's how I see it. So I keep on changing my books and my articles and things over time,
Yeah.
because of all this new material coming in.
Information, absolutely.
She brought up the issue of we have to teach them how to learn, not just teach them things,
Yes.
because they're gonna have to learn new things all the time. So learning to learn is the key thing.
Absolutely. And you know, I think there's a strategy, right? There's a strategy already built into higher education, but I think it tends to be in the graduate level or the doctoral level. Because, right, the expectation as a graduate student, whether it's a master's or a doctoral degree, is you have to create new knowledge or at least synthesize knowledge. And there's a lot of practice, I think, regardless of the field, where you do that, where you're conducting research or you're synthesizing, you're writing, you're creating. And I think we tend to leave it in graduate school, and I think the argument sometimes tends to be that maybe undergraduates aren't ready for that transition, for those expectations. But I would argue that we might not have a choice anymore. It might have to start at the undergraduate level, right? Research, and there's different initiatives that I'm sure you all participate in different capacities of allowing students to research, contribute, add new knowledge even as undergraduates. But I think it starts there, right? Start at least within our control, right? Because ultimately the K through 12 is also responsible for a lot of the molding that's happening with your students. But I think we can start at the undergraduate level and maybe giving them those bigger problems that we might reserve only for graduate students. Maybe it's time to allow undergraduate students to delve into those particular problems. And do you think there's any issues with that? Problems that might arise?
I think if you scaffold the assignments, I'm with you. You know, I don't teach a content-based course. It's a writing course, so it's about strategies and how to do research, for example, and how to synthesize. And I do that with my 100 level students. They do a literature review, and I give them a synthesis matrix. So a lot of it has to do with the scaffolding. So some of what you're saying here, right? It's like how you build up to a bigger assignment.
Yeah.
And working through the various different steps. It's not just like, here's here's this assignment, go
Yeah.
do it, but how you scaffold that, although part of it allowing
Yeah.
it to fail, I haven't
This-
been really
this-
that
this
good
guy-
about like saying,
Yeah.
okay, go figure it out,
Yeah.
right? Although I do want to do that because I know it's important that they have those problem solving skills. But the scaffolding, right, and also.
There
can
are
also help. So
students
maybe
that
doing
will-
both, right? Okay, go figure this out. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, you couldn't. Here's this tool. Like, how does this help you? Something along those lines.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think
I
ideally
like
it's,
that concept, you know.
you're absolutely right, Dina. I think ideally it's everything, right? It's incorporating scaffolding, it's incorporating moments of failure, maybe some gamification, some portfolios where they can go into the workforce saying, this is what I worked on during my undergraduate career. I don't think any of the any singular thing that we mentioned actually solves learning outcomes. I think that it's kind of works in tandem. And it works with you as well, you know, because I think the instructor is still a critical component of the learning process. But it's just interesting, right? We're working in new boundaries, a new idea. The problems that we're confronting are problems that our predecessors have not had to confront or had to solve. The technology is changing pretty rapidly. You know, we're still trying to promote online learning within a computer or desktop format. And granted, in 5 to 10 years, maybe even less time, mobile learning will be how people learn in the internet, in that modality. It might be the new format, is how do we set it up to work on a phone. These are all questions that we're dealing with, you're grappling with. But I think incorporating little things, differentiation, exposing them, okay, I have a test, but the tests have different question types. But you know what, I also have a portfolio. Or you know what, I have this matrix that I want you to look at and then take this article and synthesize and create a bibliography for a research paper. A lot of different ways to break down a course so that it gives students multiple opportunities. I will say with the choice issue, for one of my graduate classes, or actually two, it was the same professor. She allowed you, so none of the things were necessarily optional off the bat, but she did allow you to choose what grade you wanted. And depending on what grade you chose is what you had to finish. So obviously to get an A, you would have to complete all the assignments. To get a B, you would have to complete almost all the assignments, maybe no discussion boards or something like that. To get a C, all you have to do is take the quizzes or something like that. And it's crazy, but even just allowing students to have that choice, because some students, right, they're coming in there and they're just like, I want a C, I just want to, and for them to have that opportunity, and chances are that they'll want to do more. So you're not, this is the stipulation, is you can always move up. So if you choose a C, you can always, if you realize that you've done everything to get a C and you can handle more, you can do what's necessary to get that B. But if you're at an A, you commit to the A and you move down to the B, you can't go back to the A. So that was kind of the stipulations. You had to really choose how you wanted it to be. But the choices don't necessarily have to be so specific, and you can just create it at the beginning. Just what type of grade do you want, and these are the assignments you have to do. And I think that can go a long way to empowering students.
So since we're talking assessment, I have a question. I would love to put on my syllabus this table that says an A is over 90, a B is whatnot, and have it fixed. But the issue, or even do something like what you said, you choose your grade, you want to see, this is what you have to do. The issue I have with that is, if everybody hits that A, I cannot give all A's. The dean is going to come down on me and say, what are you doing? So I don't fix it, because if everybody gets to the point where they are all going to have an A, I'm going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
So I wonder how other people deal with this.
Yeah.
And if they do like a fixed grade, an A means this, a B means this, how do you avoid giving all A's?
I think that's a great point.
Are there
I have to admit that I actually I took the class twice. First class I did the A path. The second class I just did the B. And so what she did, and I think this is how she's able to control maybe not everyone getting A's, is to get A was a lot. And when you see it on the syllabus, all the requirements of the A as opposed to the B or the C, I think that's where students start saying their laziness kicks in, right? And they're like, I don't know if I'm willing. So I believe it can work if the A is real. You make it a tough
You have to
thing.
make the A really hard.
Yes, really hard to achieve. And I think that's where you can avoid that issue. And I think that's how she avoided it, is that the requirements to get the A were vast, right? It was almost like double the work, even for the B level. So I think that's how she was able to get students to choose different paths. But that's a good question, because I know, right, we have to meet minimums, or not exceed maximums
Some
of.
grade bands that some schools like to have.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Personally, I wish we didn't have grades at all, right? I don't think that's what higher education is about. I think ultimately, I would ask, I want to pose this question to you. Would you rather have a student that applies what you're teaching in real life? Maybe they didn't do so well, but they're applying what they actually learned what, or the student who doesn't apply it, but they did really well and they got an A in your course. Who's the better student, right?
You have to determine competency in some way,
Yeah.
so that's the dilemma.
But competency in a world where new knowledge is going to be created at a rapid pace might be just a competency of synthesizing in their own words, right? It might be just that,
Yeah.
Instead of necessarily regurgitating the fact or the formula. Maybe it's in their own opinion can matter as well. I don't know, just interesting problems,
Yeah,
dilemmas,
yeah.
issues.
I have a question. The article that you read.
Yes, sir.
The students are students from India.
Yes.
Okay.
And you know what? I was reading through it, and the second and third study was students in India. The first study was Singapore.
Okay.
So
There is a cultural dimension to this. American society, and these are different societies, love things written down. These are specific instructions. You don't give specific instructions, students are always complaining. I'm teaching a graduate course now, and I have the same problem. They wrote 3 blogs. The third blog was, the first 2 are on, different articles. The third blog is, go to visit a religious site, a mosque, a church, a temple, a botanica, and then write a reflective paper on it, 3 pages. And people ask, specific instructions, how? So I think there is a tension between that theory and how it works, and I think there is a cultural component which has to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, students are going to complain, the professor doesn't give specific instructions in their evaluation, in their assessment. They are going to do that. So I think there is a tension. I would love to read that and
absolutely.
Right, but I think also with the article, because I was reading it here as well, he didn't just leave it at that,
Okay.
right? Then they came back and had the direct instruction piece, and that's where the additional assessment came in. So it was kind of like, let them fail and work
Then
through the
come back and-
problems, and then
Okay.
then they came back and had the direct instruction.
Yeah, like a reflective
And then
piece.
those people actually ended up doing better because they had tried to solve them on their own. Once they got the instructions, they still had that critical thinking that they had done before, versus the students who just received direct instruction. So they both ended up with direct instruction. There was just kind of a
Exactly.
struggle with the problem. So I mean, I think that there is a culture of like, I've had students come up to me and just tell me what to write. Just tell me what to write. Like, you can choose your own topic is daunting. It's like, really? You're not gonna tell me to write X, Y, and Z about X, Y, or Z, right? But I think it's not just like, go do it, right? It's coming back, now I'm going to instruct you, have the direct instruction, and it's still scary though.
It is.
It's still
I've
scary for
had
the students,
backlash.
yeah.
So there was a while back, I decided to teach a class where I would just let them go down a wrong path until we hit a wall, and then see, now this is why doing it that way is not gonna work. So now let's go back and do it the other way. And I thought that was gonna be like, everybody was gonna love this. They're like, you wasted all this time. Why did you just let it just go the other way? So there are people who are reluctant to this. I'm gonna let you fail because you're going to see what doesn't work first. And then when you see what works, you maybe understand better, oh, okay, I see now why this is the
Yes.
right way, because that way leads to this problem.
Absolutely.
So there are people who don't like
Yeah.
to be led to failure on purpose.
Absolutely. And I don't know how to summarize the culture of the United States that encompasses that. And maybe it's our winners and losers concept of thinking. That somehow in this world there's just winners and losers and that's it. Like there's no gray area that exists. And I think citizens of other countries have a better understanding of the gray area of life. And I think you're taught it, whether it's through what you're experiencing in your culture or what your culture has experienced in the past. And I think Americans are just so used to a certain style, this sort of regimented, you're either successful or unsuccessful sort of ideology or thought process that makes those moments difficult. I will say that assignment sounds great. And your assignment sounds great too. And maybe that's what we're, right? Isn't that what we're supposed to do sometimes, is make those students uncomfortable? I would argue, is having a reaction better than no reaction at all?
I stopped doing it.
No, I get it. I get
Totally stopped
it.
it.
Because, you have your evaluations and other stuff to consider as well. But I think you're onto something, right? If they're reacting to what you're giving them. And I feel like we don't do it enough in higher education, or at least in the undergrad level, of making these students uncomfortable, right? In especially a problem set way, where they're given something and they don't have instructions, or they're given something and they're led down the wrong path only to learn that there is a better path later on, and again, they might not fully understand that what you have done for them is give them a full scope understanding of the problem. Because if you gave them just the answer, or the path to the answer from the beginning, then they wouldn't have the concept of knowing that there's another way you can go around and that way is wrong. And these things are invaluable, I think, in the learning process. So to the best of your ability, I don't want any of you or anybody listening to get bad evaluations. I think you have to do what your students are comfortable with. But I think it says something, right? That every time we're giving students this opportunity to fail, or choice, even just a choice, that they don't like it. Some students just don't like it. And I personally think it's our K through 12 culture. The way these students, our K through 12 schools weren't meant to teach the best and the brightest. It was meant to push people through, in a very routine, almost militarized way, right? Like factories. And I think higher education, we're not a factory, right? You guys have relationships with your students. You have desires and hopes and outcomes for your students to better their lives. And not that K through 12 teachers don't, right? I don't want to say that, but I think the style is different. And maybe we should, as much as possible, present those uncomfortable moments of, hey, you have a choice. Because that's what you're going to have in the real life. You're going to have choices. You're going to have different paths you can take. You're not always going to get instructions, right? I know you guys aren't given a lot of instructions sometimes when you're given a new class, and you have to figure it out. You problem solve, and I think that's the same thing that we have to try to prepare our students for as well. Is you're going to be encountered. You're going to be given situations with very little instructions, very little feedback, and you're going to be expected to solve. So a lot of issues, and I think that's a good thing. I think we're onto something, right? When they're getting angry about something. That they're getting passionate about it. I think that's a good thing. So with that said, I hope this was helpful for you guys. Different ideas, different concepts. I love hearing your stories, and I'm glad that you guys at least tried to incorporate some choice, some failure. Eunice, please try to think about doing it again, and maybe a different concept, a shorter time frame.
I'm considering doing at least one or two case studies, because I think the nice thing about case studies is the lack of structure, right? It's just like, here's a story, an issue, or a situation, and there's no single right or wrong answer. So, and people may see may give importance to some aspects of the story more than others. So you have the person that looks at it about, whoa, there's a marketing situation going on. Yes, but there's also an operation situation. And these departments don't function in silos. When marketing makes a decision, it affects the other department. And when we teach students, we teach, this is a marketing class. This is an ops class. But they don't get to see, well, wait a second, I have to be careful because if I do this now, what's gonna happen to those guys?
Yeah.
And in a class where you have students with different interests, there might be someone concentrating in marketing and someone concentrating in finance, and you give a case that has two angles, and they start talking to each other.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm trying to go that direction now. But I have to kind of look through cases and pick one that fits, and it's so much work.
Absolutely.
But I think it's gonna be fun when you deliver it.
Absolutely, it sounds like it. And again, if we can help in any way, help you incorporate any things, we'd be happy to do that. Any sort of elements that we spoke about today, we'd be happy to talk further on. But again, thank you guys for coming
Thank
and
you,
taking
guys.
the time. This is awesome.
I think I'm going to contact you about the